Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Continuous Testing Meetup. I'm really glad to see you all here at our first meetup session in this year. So then let's start. At first, I want to say a big thank you to our sponsor, Source Lab, to Amusement and Traindiff to helping us to organize this meetup. So in case you passed our last meetup event, please go to our website, continuoustestingmeetup.com. You will find all information there and also links to the video recording. And today I'm really happy to see here Elizabeth with her topic live exploratory testing. I had a pleasure to meet her at Agile Testing Days last year, and her topic was ranked as a top 10 best ranked topic at the conference. So that's why really, Elizabeth, thank you to being here, and the stage is yours.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I am going to share my screen and make you all bigger on this other screen. Okay, so do you see the bullet points now? Continuous testing meetup. Great. Okay, so I'm also going to share this link with you because I realize I've done this talk a couple of times before, but I realized that if you're all at home today on your computers, you can go explore this yourself. So the thing I'll be doing today is demonstrating some live exploratory testing, but if you want to, instead of listening to me, do the testing yourself, and then we can talk about what you find at the end, you're welcome to do that. The place where you can find that information is in the resources bullet. If you go to the repos section, you can find the instructions for getting the API going. We're going to be testing an API today. This is, we'll be using it just like through the command line. There's no front end for it. There's a collection of Bruno API calls. Bruno is just an open source alternative to Postman. You can, I think I've got the link for that in tools here. Once I get my cursor in the right spot. Yes, use Bruno is the right link for that. I'll be looking at some automated tests. Those are on Codeberg, which is also just a GitHub variant that's open source. And then, yeah, we'll probably look at an API doc. Reference to the Mozilla ones are currently my favorite. And then the thing that I'm using here, as you can see, is workflowy. That's the infinite bulleted list. So probably I'll just be using it like this for the most part, where I expand and collapse sections. It's like a mind map in that way. But I may also kind of zoom into a section so I can go and click on this dot tools and then only see the section tools here. Or I can go up another level and see that.
Sorry, Elizabeth, for some reason I can't see what you are in the link that you shared. I can't access all this information. Maybe
Ooh,
only
interesting.
testers,
That's good to know. I can put these links in the chat directly and then sort out the access later. Me either. What? Okay, wait, let me try again.
Thank you.
Share. View. It should be this. Okay.
Yeah, it was requesting to log in, basically.
It shouldn't require a lot, or at least I've successfully shared it in the past without a login, but it's possible that they've changed their settings on the workflow side. Let me see if I can, yeah. Okay, so all the links I described are now in the chat instead. The API link, the Bruno, the automated tests, and the MDN docs. So the rest of the stuff I will sort out the access to later. Okay, because it'd be better to get started. So yes, who am I? I'm a tester. I started a job at Rabobank in the Netherlands in September, so I'm a lead DevOps engineer there, focused on test automation. And I have a blog, which is myname.com. And I have a Mastodon account. That's what this link is here. So if you're on Mastodon, follow me there, or vice versa. I'll find you. There's so few of us. Let's all follow each other. And I also, as Julia knows, I run an online free thing that's either a lean coffee for an hour or an open space for a few hours once a quarter, and that's called the Friends of Good Software Conference. So we abbreviate it as FrogsConf. So you're welcome to join us there as well. I think that's all I want to say about myself. So indeed, I will be doing some testing today. And I don't think that it's super important to memorize these buzzwords that testers, exploratory testers in particular, keep in mind. But it's interesting to know that the words exist because sometimes at least knowing that there is a word for a concept helps you remember the concept. I have to say I'm not a person who corrects and indoctrinates my colleagues on this vocabulary in particular, but it does help me teach and understand the concept by knowing that these words exist. Okay, so an oracle. Okay, I'm gonna turn the comments off. It's great. Okay, I'll look at your comments at the end. An oracle is how we know something is a feature or a bug. It helps us separate our observation from our opinion. I think a lot of times when we're testing something, we'll get that, ugh, yuck, why is it that way kind of feeling initially. And then we have to kind of go back and justify, okay, this is the expected behavior. This is actually what I saw. Here's where they're different. The expected behavior is the oracles, the thing that gives you the expectation about the software. So the thing that we'll use today are indeed the HTTP references, the response status codes, and what we expect each of the methods to be doing on an HTTP REST API. A heuristic is a rule of thumb. It's a list of stuff, usually for testers. Testers love looking at old lists of stuff that they made the last time they tested it, lists of stuff that are reference guides in general for the internet. So that includes the HTTP status reference, acceptance criteria, documentation, user guides. Looking at what has been discovered in the past and what all of the options are helps us make decisions about how deep and how broad our testing should be. Alex Schlotterbeck also coined the term microheuristics. You'll see a few points, hopefully, in this presentation where I'm making a decision about whether I should go in one direction or another direction. So like within an exploratory testing session, what am I doing next? Just those little micro decisions. That's a microheuristic. Great. And then the last buzzword to be familiar with anyway is charter. And that's usually just a mission or a direction for your testing, where you're going, what you hope to achieve. I'll be using charters in a rather loose way of just kind of, okay, I want to be looking over there. I want to be looking at the API or at the API specs or at the happy path tests. And that's usually how I think about my work day to day at my job. There's also a more formal definition and template that Elizabeth Hendrickson, different Elizabeth, wrote about in her book, Explore It. Still a good book. If you haven't read it, it still works. Go read it. The way that she described charters is in three parts, as having a target where you're exploring, a resource, let me zoom in here, what you're using or how you're exploring, and the information, which is like what question you want to answer. So for today, our mission is given by this hypothetical team that is quite similar to a bunch of teams that I've actually interacted with. So this team has been building a product. The product is a way to keep track of the books that you've read. So if you've used Goodreads or the Storygraph, it's like that. Their tester just quit, and although their tester wrote some tests, the developers on the team felt like they didn't really get feedback about the product. So they have a set of green tests. All the tests are green, but there's still that feeling like, oh, I don't know if this is good enough. I don't know if that says anything about the thing that we built. And so they want me to go look at the tests to see what's valuable and to give them some sense of what's covered and what's not covered by the tests the automated tests that have been written. So that's our mission today, is to go like understand what the software does, understand what the tests do, and give some feedback about coverage of the test. So that is our main, I guess I'll just leave it at this level charter. Figure out the coverage of the tests. Great. So as you can see, some of these bullet points had things in them already. This one's empty because we're doing this live. All right, we're diving in. Let's see. Okay. So first I want to see what the software does, whether I can get that running. And because live demos are terrifying, I did get it running before I signed on here. So we've got the bookshelf API going, and I can see from the terminal output that it is going at my local host, 8,000 here. And like the fact that it's still producing output periodically, it did when I clicked over to it, means that I think it's going. So that's good. The application seems to be running. I'm going to keep track of good stuff. API produces terminal output. We'll see if that actually means that it's going, that it does a thing. Part of the reason that I want to collect good things is for the test report that I'll do kind of for the team stand-up at the end. I don't want to just give the team bad news because a lot of what teams need is actually to understand what works, what they can deploy to make sure that the thing that they thought they built does actually still function, especially if somebody who had been testing it left some unknown period of time ago, right? So it's good to collect things that we're curious about, to maybe not show up and accuse a new team that we're just joining that invited us in for their help of writing bugs on purpose or creating a lot of issues, right? We don't know that things that we uncover are necessarily problems. It might be things they already know about. It might be things where they're relatively early on in the product life cycle, and so they just haven't gotten to build that piece yet. So we will collect things we're curious about. We also want to collect good things. Okay, so yeah, the application, the API looks like it's running. That's a good start. But now we want to actually go and call it. So let's pull up the Postman replacement thing, Bruno, and actually make some API calls. So let's just see if we can run all of these. I think that's what this does. Run again. Yes. Okay, so we ran all 7 of the calls. It looks like, is that true? 7? Yeah. 7, and all 7 of these things gave me a green check mark. I don't, given that this is just called bookshelf API calls, I think, and that they said the tests were somewhere else, I think this is not really a test, right? There's no assert, there's no making sure this is the right behavior. It just didn't time out. There wasn't some network issue. So like this doesn't tell me a whole lot. I can go look at all the status codes for these. Let's see, get should be a 200. That's good. Get one book, didn't find it. Okay, let's go look at that one. I don't want to do it like that. I want it the whole section. Yeah, okay, great. So we go and get this book with an ID and we don't find it. Let's see what all books are in there and if there is a book with such an ID. No. Okay, so that's actually good that we didn't find the book. If we go and look at our list of all of the books, there's just one book in there. It has some ID that starts with an ED. Let's copy that and put that into our get one book call here. And then save and run this. And now we get a 200 okay, and then it looks like it gets the same information. Let's see if this is the same information. Delicate edible birds, 2009, 302 pages. Let's see. Yeah, that looks like the same thing. And that's what I would expect, that it's just retrieving the same thing a different way. Good. That looks good. What else looked weird here? Post books, 400 bad request. Okay, what's happening there? Request data failed validation title is a required property. Okay, true. I don't see title here. I am curious about like, okay, there's some validation on the back end. It did send a, right, so it was expecting something in the request body that it didn't get. So I'm happy with that we got a 400 response and that it said bad request. That's what I would expect if the body is wrong. I am curious what else what are the other requirements? Why, like if title is required, which of these other things are required? What else do we want to happen here? But I'm realizing I didn't write any of this down yet, and I'm gonna have to tell the team at stand up tomorrow what is happening. Okay, so what good things have we found? We have found, no, not like that. We have found that yeah, each of the API calls happens. Works feel strong because we haven't actually seen that post work yet. So that's a start, but we're curious. We looked at this list and we want to look into the post, these two, and then the delete and the put. These were unauthorized. So let's go look into those. And what else have we discovered? Oh yeah, that the book, when we took the one ID from the book, we were able to go get the one book from the database using the what looked like a UUID. Should probably check that it is before I write that, using the, looks, certainly the field is named ID. Can guarantee that. Okay. So now let's go back to that post call. Title is a required property. Let's add a title to this book and see if it works after we do that. No, like that. Okay. Save, run that. Okay, so now instead of getting a 400 bad request, I get a 201 created. So this is a post call. Is that what we would expect? Let's go look. No, I don't want to see these ads. Oh, whatever. Okay. Let's see. So 201 created. The request succeeded. A new resource was created as a result. This is typically the response sent after post requests or some put requests. Okay, I think that matches my expectations because what we did was we wanted to add a new book to the database. It says that it created it. We got this ID. We could go check that it was actually created. So I'm going to go get the list of all the books now, which was just one book before. And then we should see the House of Leaves with this F55 ID in there now. Let's see. Yep. Okay, F55, House of Leaves, good. That's in there. So it looks like the post is working on a very basic level. We've seen it work once with the fields that we provided, that we have saved here.
I do have a question. When I'm looking at that, we have two different IDs. You passed it an ID and then returned a different ID. So that would be a curious for me.
Where are the IDs different for you? Can you
look in the post that you sent for posting the book? You have an ID that JSON. And if you look at the ID that was returned, it's a different ID. So is that the new ID for the book, or is that the transaction ID, or what is that?
Let's see. I do think that this is an ID for the book because then when we went and got all the books, we saw the list here. But you're right that this ID in the body of the request did not match what is in the response. So we should go look at the API specs and see if we can pass an ID in there or whether it's created. Okay, so if we go and look at the API specs and go find the post request, it doesn't give us the whole request body, but it does say no ID. So I think for me, you're right that I'm curious about like what should happen there. Like it's weird that on the post, when we passed, this is too many words. Let's see. When we gave it like an ID provided in the request, didn't match the ID in response body. So yeah, it's true that that does match what the API specs say. I wonder, that kind of goes back to the more general question of what validation is happening here. Like, if we also pass in a field called Curtis, yes, we have a Curtis on the call. Is that going to, no. Okay, so it doesn't like that. Invalid JSON. Oh, but maybe it's just mad about it being JSON incorrectly. Oh, it's because this is a string and not a Boolean. Let's try Curtis yes, like this. Okay, so now we have a book with 69F as the ID, which should have all of the same information. Not this field, obviously. We decided ID isn't there. But then if we go and get all the books, what do we expect? 3 books, 1 with the Curtis field? Oh yeah, we got a Curtis here. Okay, and then this ID is indeed the one I passed in and not, or the one rather that was returned in the response and not provided in the request. So that matches some level of like, this is normal, this is what I would expect, but it is still, I wonder what a developer thinks of that, or at least I would want maybe a bit more of a fleshed out API spec to provide the whole, like which fields are required, which fields are optional, so that I'm not guessing around what these fields all are.
Yeah.
I'm just seeing in the comments that
For
Ben
me,
expects
this is
they're
like
generated automatically.
this sort of question is where you start getting into the fun of exploratory testing, because you're like, oh, this happened. Is that expected? What should be happening? Have we, what's going on here? I don't understand it. So
yeah, that's why we do this. If we knew exactly what would happen, we wouldn't have to test it. Well, no, seriously though, right? Like if
yeah.
Part of our job is to decide what's valuable to spend our time on, there's a large canvas of options that we could be exploring. And so if we have to make meaningful decisions about what to cut out and what we're going to invest in. And so, yeah, if you're either like 100% confident or pretty sure you've seen it work recently, go find something where you're less confident so that you have more coverage. Good. Okay. So what were we doing? We were on the Bruno call. We looked at the post. That worked once. We added some weird stuff there. Always good. No, I wanted to click on that. Oh, it's angry now. Okay, let's try clicking here. Okay, so the delete call gave us a 401 unauthorized. And I would expect then that that's related to the authorization because it's an OAuth thing. No OAuth here. No headers. I wonder if there's anything on the whole collection. Let me remember where. Oh yeah, headers. Yeah, okay. So we've got a user and a token here. I wonder why those aren't being applied to the delete value. Because this says it adds the request headers in every request in the collection. I'm assuming that copying and pasting these into these fields, no, not like that. User, and then this, and then token, and then this. It won't magically fix it, but let's find out. It did not. Okay, but then I wonder if it's because, let's see, so a delete probably takes a token. Let's make sure that's what the spec says. If we go and look at the delete call, request body none, requires a token, and then we should get a 200 response with no response body back. Okay, but I did notice that one of the other calls there was to create the token. So I wonder if we go, you may have already figured this out if you've got the collection downloaded, that I think if we go and create a token and get a new one and use that. Ooh, 404 not found. That's closer. Okay. So yeah, 401 was we're not even accepting this response. What are you doing? Go get us, access. But 404 is we tried to delete your thing, but could not find it to delete. And so this is probably just some old ID. So let's go back and we're going to leave the Curtis yes book in there, but we're going to delete the other one that I created. We're going to take this ID and go and delete it. And then we'll never know if those collection headers worked or not because I gave up on that. Okay. So yes. Okay. So now we've called this and gotten a 200 okay with no response body, which is what the API spec said. Yes, it said it here. Okay, so what have we learned? We looked at the delete. We saw this work once. That's good. And so far, I would say the API spec hasn't lied to us, but is also missing some, at least request body details, maybe some other details. And the fact that overall, right, like the application that we're using is running locally on HTTP and not HTTPS, that like we're able to just go ahead and create our own token, right, like make up our own user here and get access to the whole thing to be able to delete stuff from the database. It does make me wonder kind of what status this application is in. Where is this product? Are we going to be running it in the cloud? Like, this is all fine if it's just me collecting books for my personal library. But the thing that I'm curious about is, who's using this application? Where is it going to run? Yeah, like, will it run in the cloud? Is it a web application? If it's really going to be like Goodreads or the Story Graph, I might expect different users to be using it, to have some shared database, I was going to say God figure, but like some admin to add the books to the database originally. So yeah, I'm curious just what the vision for the whole product is and where we are in the life cycle. We haven't yet tried the put call. I guess we could do that. Let's see. Okay. So put, what is put? Let's see what it says put is. It doesn't tell us what put is. I guess it expects us to know what put is. Where does it tell us what put is? Request methods, put. Creates a new resource or replaces a representation. Okay. Let's see. Okay. So this also gives us a clue. The subtitle, it says updated subtitle here. So it looks like it's trying to update something that's already in the database. So let's not make the same mistake we did with delete. Let's go and see what all is in the database now. Oh yeah, I deleted that thing. And it is gone. Forgot to check that. But let's go and get this Curtis book and update that to all of these other details. And then, actually, these details match these more closely. Let's update this book. Yeah. Okay, so we have currently an empty subtitle, and then once we put this, of course. Let's go get this and put this for the collection. Save and see if that works. Yeah, great. Okay, so now we've checked two things, that the collection feature in Bruno works for the headers, and that, let's see, it looks like we were able to update the subtitle. Let's go and get all the things in the actual database. And so when I hit this, we should see subtitle updated here. Yeah, nice. Okay, so we saw the put work once. I think that's enough. Just looking at the Bruno collection, let's make sure that we record that, though. Not curious. We are good on the put. Saw the subtitle field update. Great. Okay. So we have looked so far at the terminal API output. We looked at, have we checked that again since we did this? Yeah, it looks the same. Okay. We looked at the Bruno API calls, but we haven't. Oh, we used anyway the API specs. And we haven't yet looked at the automated tests. So let's do that next. Normally I would indent the bullet points here, but I forgot, so we're not doing it. Okay. So for the automated tests, I got those pulled up in PyCharm here. And this is the README. Okay. What is the Bookshelf app? It allows you to add, update lists, and delete books. We have seen that. Cool. Not lying to us. Like Goodreads, StoryGraph, matches what the team told me. Amazing. API specs can be found on GitHub. This is probably the same link we had. Yes. Great. Same specs. Not looking at some old version of the specs. Great. Okay. The API endpoint can be found in the specs or in comp test. Sure. We already had it from Bruno, but fine. This repo is just for the tests. Find the code on GitHub. This is true, right? It looked like we were in, this repo that we're in here is called Bookshelf Tests. And if we go look at where we were running the actual API, this is called Bookshelf API. It does make me wonder though, kind of how the team was working. If you would like, I'm wondering if there was a reason to keep the tests separately from the actual code itself, because generally I'd want the branches to stay in sync. I would want to make sure that as you're adding a new patch call to the API or something, the tests are also included in that same pull request, that you're able to run them together. So I am curious, just like what the team was working, or yeah, like the branching strategy. Why a separate repo? Is this one of the reasons that the tester left was because they weren't involved in the work of the team? Interesting. Okay, so we've got some happy paths and unhappy paths here. Let's start with the happy paths. Ooh, okay. I'm already seeing just from my IDE, this is PyCharm, that we've imported JSON, but then we're not using that library. That's why it's grayed out. So that's interesting. It looks like the repo is probably missing some linting. I wouldn't want that kind of thing to be committed. And then we've got, let's see, the first test here is just goes to the knock knock endpoint. Did we see that in Bruno? I forget. Collection. Oh, of course I closed it. Collection. Run it. Oh yeah, I did. I just breezed past it. Okay. So yeah, we called the knock knock here, and it got a who's there response. That is what we see in the test. Text who's there. Not a JSON, which is why that library is not used. And indeed, that's what the API spec should happen. Says should happen. Oh, this does say not supported. HTTPS. Interesting. Okay. So this first test looks fine. Oh, did the test pass? Let's see. Let's run the tests. 14 passed. They passed pretty quickly. They pass several times in a row. So something about the like data setup of the tests is doing okay. And indeed, locally running tests I would expect to run pretty quickly for an API. So let's look at this next test. We've got get all books, which matches one of the calls we saw, and it pulls in the rest endpoint. Let's control click through to there. So yeah, we've got the endpoint. I think that's the same as we've been calling. Let's go look at Bruno. And yeah, localhost 8080 books. This was the sort of base URL. Great. That's what I'd expect. And then the other thing we've got here as a fixture to set us up is a setup books fixture. So this is for the whole session. And it, oh boy, instantiates an empty list of book ID numbers, and then it provides a whole set of book details, which looks like it does have a title in here, but no ID. So that's different than that Bruno call we saw, but is more what we would expect probably. And then it posts these book details to the REST endpoint and asserts that that succeeds, that it's a 201, the post happens. And then it appends the ID of the book to the empty list. Okay, not sure why, but like fine so far. And then it looks, let's see here, like it does the same thing a second time, right? Like this whole bit from lines 35 to 45 is the same as this whole bit from 24 to 34. It's just for a second book. And then at the end of that, we return the book ID numbers. We don't yield the book ID numbers. We're not like cleaning them up at the end of this fixture. So I wonder how they get cleaned up. Let's ask, or at least be curious about that. If we have time to look into it, we can. How does the test data get cleaned up? Oh, but the reason we know that it does get cleaned up is because we saw something good. The tests run fast and multiple times, which is more than I can say about a lot of tests I've seen. Okay, so that was all to set up this getting all the books. Okay, so then we get all the books now that we've got 2 books in our database, and we make sure that that returns a 200, which is what we'd expect for a get. That's fine. And then we make sure that we got the length of that list that we got is 2, which, yeah, if you're running the test locally and it's on localhost, oh, it's weird that we have localhost hard-coded here and this is REST endpoint. Oh boy. That like I would expect the number of the books to be the same because nothing else has happened in between here. But it does kind of assume that the tests are running sequentially, that nobody's deleting anything, that nobody else has access to the database. So might be that these tests are fine for now, but I don't know that these tests are fine forever. And then what we do is we have an empty list of titles, an empty list of IDs, and for each of the books in the list, we try to see if there is a title and an ID. And if that fails, then we assume that there is an ID, but not a title. We say the book with the ID number has failed, doesn't have a title. But if that succeeds, then we append both the title to the titles list and the ID to the IDs list. And then we make sure that House of Leaves is one of the titles. Okay, so like, yeah, House of Leaves is one of the titles. That's not a bad assert. That's true. But this is a very selective set of things that could happen. So there's one thing that's weird here, which is we're trying and accepting, but we saw when we used Bruno that title is required. I don't know why we have exception handling for like, oh, this book doesn't have a title when we know that our API requires the book to have a title. We saw that. So like, this is a weird thing to write in this test. And we saw all these other fields, right? We saw author and pages and publisher and year. And these are only the fields that we, tried. We know that it accepts a Curtis field. Like, why are we, yeah, like it doesn't, let's see. I guess this is just one happy path test. We'll go look at the unhappy paths. But like, I feel like there's so much more that we could assert than just this one title, right? Like we've got all the other information about the book. So that's a little suspicious to me. So I'm going to collapse it so that I remember to talk to my developers about it. Okay. Now we've got this test for the one book. And we still have that same setup. And so when we go and try to get the first book that we set up, which is this House of Leaves book. Oh, let me move this and control that away. Yes. When we get that book, the status code we want is 200, sure. But then the same thing, we're only looking at a subset of fields. And actually, this test isn't even testing the value in the fields. It's making sure that just the key, that like the field ID is there. It doesn't actually make sure there is something in that field, that it's not just an empty string or anything. Okay, so that's weird. Have I noted that that's something that we need to look at? Let's see. Definitely not. Curious. On the happy paths, forgetting books, book and books. Like why those fields? Why only those fields? Is there some magic? Was this just the first test data that they hard coded when they were doing TDD and then the person forgot? Like maybe there's a reason, but I'm curious what it was. Okay, we can ask. Okay, so now we're going to add a new book that corresponds to the post call. Here's all this stuff. We get a 201. That is indeed what we saw when we did it in Bruno. We created a book. And then we're just checking the title. This is so weird. Okay, but it's kind of the same problem we already listed. So we just need to ask them a blanket, like, which fields are we validating? Why are we validating those fields? Rather than listing it 10 million times. I don't want to file 17 bug reports when I can just file one. Okay, and get a good answer. So now we've got update one book, and that is, wow. Using, we do have the credentials that we saw in Bruno, the username and token. And then we're taking the first book. We wrote ourselves a note, somebody did anyway, to check the name of the current book. Oh, I don't need that time going on. Stop. Thank you. And then we are updating this with this information. And the thing that we're doing here is we're asserting our request. We're not asserting the response. When you Python assert just some text, all it does is make sure that it's not none. And we've seen the put response that gives us an ID back. Or right, was it all the details? Let's see. What was the put? Yeah, it gives us a whole body back. So all this assert is going to do is just say that, yes, I received a response body of some sort that wasn't none, which is like, it's not really what we want to be asserting. We're not actually checking that the book that we tried to update is updated. Right when we did it ourselves, we went in like back to the list of all the books to make sure that that worked. So this is suspicious. Gosh. I mean, I could look at these rest of these happy paths, but now I'm running out of time, so I'm going to look at the unhappy paths. Oh gosh. Okay. So there are a couple things I'm noticing here, because I think overall the question we want to answer for this testing session, once I go back to our notes here, is find out the coverage of the tests, right? So we're like, so far, haven't looked at the delete, but not happy with the way that the tests are covering the API. Aside from that, and then when I go and look at these unhappy paths, I've got this commented outline, like we're not even checking the message that comes back here. This whole test is commented out. Oh man, what else am I seeing here? Let's see. Cannot patch a field that doesn't exist. We don't even have a patch call, right? Like if we go and look at our list of all the things we had, why do I keep doing this? Okay, run. Yeah, we have a post, we have a put, but then why is the test? Okay, the test is calling a put, but like updating the ISBN number, we didn't even see an ISBN number field. We had an ID number, we had a page number. What is this doing? Or like, what does it want to be doing? What are the requirements here? Yeah, like we don't have a patch. It could be that this is a typo and they meant to say put, but then I have questions. Okay. Same thing with yeah, we've got this is actually calling a patch. And then we get a 405 response. What is a 405 response? Let's go double check what that is. Response status 405. Method not allowed. Yeah, so we do a patch call, and this test says, great, let's assert that this method doesn't exist on this API. and then the test passes. So like it is testing something, but I don't think it doesn't give me confidence about the product or like what I'm uncovering about how this API should work. Okay. Cannot delete a book that doesn't exist. Yeah, we did see this. Maybe that's fine. But like, how do you know that this ID number isn't in there? Maybe if it's a UUID and you're generating it that way, you can be sure that this isn't in there. But like, oh God. Oh no! I'm just noticing this last one. Okay, so this just has the word pass, which the test is just always gonna pass. It's not actually testing anything. So I like, this might be a thing if I were in the middle of something I might do, right? I'd be like, okay, note to self, I want to see if I can delete the same book twice and I'll write this test later. I think if it were me, I'd probably write a to do and then it would like show up in a prettier color in Python, right? If we do this, it's in PyCharm anyway, right? It'd be the green instead of the orange. It might stick out more, but like, oh yeah, this pass is okay. So I think overall the question for the team. Oh yeah, we should go report to the team what happened. Let's do a stand-up. Hi, thank you for inviting me onto your team and giving me access to all of the things. I'm so glad that I was able to get the API running and I got to see the tests passing. Those passed multiple times, so something about the test data setup is really good. I also got access to those Bruno API calls. Those were really helpful for discovering what the API did. Thank you for that. I compared all of that against the API spec, and I wasn't able to find any discrepancies there. That was all really good. I did find some things that I was curious about and would love to talk to someone on the team a bit more after stand-up. That included that we provided an ID that in the post request, and it didn't match what we provided in the response body. We think that probably the API, the software itself, is generating an ID, but I'd love to know how those are generated. I saw a couple hard-coded in the automated tests, wondering a bit more about that. And overall, who is using the app, where this app is going to be deployed, where you are in the product life cycle. If the product owner can take 5 or 10 minutes to catch me up on that, that'd be great. I'd love to take a look at your backlog and see what's already in there. I did see that the tests were in a separate repo than the code, so I'm wondering if there was some blocker there or something that was driving that decision. And I didn't take a deep look at the unhappy path tests, but I was curious from looking at that one file of happy path tests about which fields were validated, what was being checked in those, and if it looks like there's an opportunity to add on to what's there. But given the tests I've seen so far, it looks like there's a lot more coverage that's needed before I would want to show this beyond the team. Thank you. Great. Okay. Love a stand-up update. That's where I provide the most information as a tester, the most often. So yes, what else did I want to close with before we move on to questions? So yes, our oracles today, going back to our buzzwords, we had the main oracle we were looking at, I would say, was the HTTP status codes. We also used the API spec as an oracle because they were good enough to do that. If those were also in a state of disarray, it might have been harder to use that as an oracle. We didn't get a chance to go and look at this really good poised heuristic that Amber Race shared. It's summarized in this blog post about the test automation course that she created. That would have given us some more information about how much coverage what we would expect from an API overall. This API wasn't delivering some of the other things, the more basic things that we would expect. So this would be kind of the next step there. And then the other thing that I've got for you, I already showed you the tools in the repos at the beginning, but I've also, if testing REST APIs specifically is a skill that you're looking to build, then practicing with Alan Richardson's, he's the evil tester on the internet, API challenges is something I'd recommend. This website's really good. And then, yeah, Amber Race has a course in Test Automation University that's for free. And if, as Curtis got excited about, you're just like, oh, this is the good stuff. We got to go see what happens. What is exploring like? Elizabeth Hendrickson's book is really good. Marat's book does more of this, of the like combining automated tests with the testing that you're doing in an exploratory way. That's what she describes as contemporary exploratory testing. There's a whole book about that. Nicola Lindgren has some of her most used heuristics on this blog post. And then, of course, there's the canonical oracles blog post. Okay. That was all I had prepared. But now that you have all had access to the API and the tests for this whole time, I'm wondering if you have other things that you've discovered. I'm going to look at the chat. Let's see what else has been happening. Oh yeah, people like the test that just said pass. This is not false. True. Be strange if the app did allow patch methods. That's true. Is this the idea that you were looking at earlier? Oh, I don't know. Deleting a book should be idempotent. Yeah. Yeah, people are just hypothesizing about the delete behavior. Yeah. What have people discovered? What do you want to talk about?
So I think this was a really good example of the sort of, I call it meatball testing that you do when you sort of jump in to sort of see what can I learn before I even take a look at the documentation and things, which can sometimes, I guess, set the standard for yourself. It's like if you know what they designed it for, you can start testing around that. But if you have no idea, you can start doing that. What are some of the things that you do to sort of scope yourself out when you're doing exploratory testing so that we can put boundaries around it so that we don't go down the rabbit hole of exploring things because we have like say an hour to the testing. So what are some of the tricks that you use to sort of say, here's what I should be testing on so I don't lose track and then suddenly my hour's up?
Yeah. Indeed, time is usually the box. Right, like knowing that it is only an hour, or for this presentation, it was like closer to a half hour. And so taking a look at the clock periodically, that's not what my timer on my phone was for, but it could have been, would have been a good thing if I wasn't a person who would look at the clock consistently. It might be that, yeah, working with a pair and having that person just be the person to remind you to stop and take notes or to remind you to stop and look at the clock or to switch off being that person would help. If you're pair testing, some of the tricks to keep my scope from going down rabbit holes. Yeah, I think overall, knowing what the goal is, being clear from the beginning at this session of saying, we know that we want to look at what the coverage of the test is. So we have to look at the application, how it's behaving now, and the tests, and compare those two things means that I could have stayed in Bruno that whole time and just looked at the application. Or I could have skipped that and like just look at all the tests in PyCharm. I could have dug into all of those I could have read through every line of those unhappy paths. I could have looked at all the other stuff of the conf test. But knowing that the goal is compare those two things, I have to save time for both of those things. And then at least that was then a specific request from the team, right? Of like, see what the coverage is like. When I'm the person deciding what the charter is, how deep should I go? How broad should I go? Some of it is indeed like what's fun, what's interesting, what looks weird to me. And so like you could get caught up in that if you have no accountability, if there's no team that you have to go in to stand up tomorrow and justify the time that you have. If you have, endless amounts of time and nobody cares whether it's used well or not, then you can go down all of those rabbit holes. Doing good exploratory testing means making good decisions in the moment about how to use your time. That doesn't really answer your question about tricks. Yeah, keeping in mind, like just having more than one thread in your brain going, I guess is what you kind of need. And whether that's your pair or whether that's yourself, but like having an eye on what you're doing and whether that's the most valuable thing is what's needed. I'm curious, Curtis, though, why do you call it meatball testing?
Well, it's people who are from my generation, Generation X, have this show called MASH, which was about people in wartime doing like that initial triage surgery and things, and they called it meatball surgery because the point was just to get the person stabilized so you could evac them out to a hospital where they could do like the 8 hours of surgery. So they would go in, they would close people up, they would get the bleeding stopped, and then get them on something and off their way. So I began calling this meatball testing because the point is just to get in, get some insights, and get out. You're not there to do a full test pass.
Okay.
But that's why I call it that.
Very good. Yeah, MASH was before my time, but I agree with the concept of doing just enough testing.
Yeah.
I think it's really tempting to want to go really deep because that's what's fun and that's where you're going to find more weird stuff. But often what is called for in our context is to have a broader view rather than a deeper view.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I also think that's why it's important to do this sort of, I don't know anything, I just know what I bring to the table myself, and just jump in and see what my expectations are when I'm doing this. And then go and take a look like you did, and then go take a look at the documentation and see what all is there and understand that. Because sometimes for me personally, if I jump in having read the documentation, that puts guardrails around me in a lot of places, and I lose some of that interesting exploratory stuff that I wouldn't catch if I didn't jump in just with no expectations initially.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't have a strong opinion about the order. For me, it doesn't constrain my thinking to have read the API specs before doing any of this stuff. It's true that in this particular session, I was like, let's try it out. Let's call this API, right? Like, let's go in to the application first. But knowing that preference about yourself and knowing whether, you'll see this and go, why is there no request body? Should there be one, right? Like what would I expect in the response body here? Can you tell me what's in there more than just JSON? And then going and looking at it might give you a place to look at something to focus on. Yeah, it kind of depends on whether this is constraining or inspiring. That'll depend on the person. Or maybe the day also. Yeah. Let's see. We also got a comment in the chat. One lesson would be don't make any assumptions about the behavior. Yeah. It's really tempting to like look at those calls and be like, okay, they all succeeded. It works. But yeah, like going in and actually, or like I ran these tests several times. They're good. They pass. Never trust a test you haven't seen fail. Never trust a test you haven't read. Trust no one, or trust but verify. Yeah. Oh, I was pointing to those things, but then I wasn't sharing my screen. Well, hopefully the words were enough. What were other people curious about? In your experience, do you think testing charters should be reviewed by peers like we review automated test code or requirements? Yes, but I was going to say I've never seen anyone do that. Very rarely have I seen developers or a product owner be involved in that level before the testing is performed. If you have that luxury, I think that the place where I've seen that happen the most often is if there's more than one tester on a team or some tester that someone with a testing focus anyway who likes this activity, it doesn't matter what their title is. That you can kind of run some ideas by before you go down a deep rabbit hole to be like, hey, is it weird that the tests are hosted at a different spot than the code? And they can be like, yeah, why don't you ask them about that? Rather than kind of getting yourself worked up into some concerned state about a particular thing that you notice. I think that can help. Or indeed being like, I'm going to go try the application and then look at the automated tests. And that's what they mean by coverage, right? And someone can be like, yes, go do that. That's the right thing. Okay, let me go spend an hour doing that. That can definitely help. The place where I've seen that help the most often is where I go into stand up and I'm like, hey, I didn't try the delete call at all. And some developer will be like, oh yeah, we haven't implemented that yet. And I'm like, cool, I will not try that, right? Just like cross things off the table completely, and get some feedback from your peers about what would be a waste of time at this point, to go and look at. That can be good. Pretty sure that you've seen this talk before. The second time is still great. Thank you. I'm impressed that you sat through it a second time. You didn't have to. Common red team strategy is to fuzz test an API first and then manually start exploring based on the fuzz test output. Do you think this would work for other groups or is a good strategy in general? I don't know what you mean by groups here. Do you mean other teams? Other APIs? Other kinds of software? Not red teams. Yes. Let me think about this. It does kind of depend, right? Like this API was in what looked like a very early state. So we could have we only added or deleted one book at a time. We could have thrown 1,000 books at this API and then seen what came out. But actually seeing that one post call that the title was required gave us more information about the validation and what was required than if we had passed in 1,000 books with titles. So yeah, I think that putting a bunch of stuff in and seeing what happens is a good strategy. Whether it's the best strategy at that point in time, I can't say. You're welcome. Other ideas? Did anyone else use the thing, run the tests on their side? Is that just an extra bonus that no one took advantage of? Somebody's going to share the recording. Thank you. Thanks, Clara.
What about coverage? Have you ever been asked to tell, okay, what have you covered in your exploratory testing? And if yes, how are you measuring that?
Ooh, how am I measuring that? People do ask me about coverage, but it's usually a Boolean. It's just like, have we covered enough or have we not covered enough? Or in the very specific unit testing case, they'll be like, what's our, line coverage or path coverage for our unit tests? And then SonarQube will tell us that. For any other type of coverage, I would have to have a model to compare it against. So one measure of coverage we used today was, oh, I'm not sure I actually scrolled through all of the API specs and counted the different API calls, but like we could have said, okay, we have 7 different calls in Bruno. How many calls are there in the API spec? Do we at least have one? Have we called everything that the developer said that they built in the spec? Have we seen the application do that? Saying that that's then 100% covered makes me very nervous. So I feel like that's not at all what it was. Or indeed, those tests, we could have like gone and looked through all the tests and been like, okay, we called the knock knock endpoint, we got all the books, we got one book, right? Like maybe we had 100% coverage for those API endpoints and we had a happy path and an unhappy path test for each of those things. But like you read those tests, that's not coverage. So then how would you describe coverage for this? Or yeah, like what is covered enough? That's going to be a conversation with the team. That's going to be like, which fields do we want to validate? Do those things matter? If that fails, do we care? And having, yeah, whether it's acceptance criteria or more often the thing I find is like, yeah, it might end up like the output at the end would be a set of automated tests where all of those things are really specified. But when you're in the middle somewhere, it's pairing with the developer, it's going to stand up every day, it's making the changes to the API specs that you think should be there. It's reconciling that tension between what you see and what should be there.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Would this be a good point to talk about your views on learning versus verifying? Or do you want to open up that can of worms?
Not sure I have much to say on that.
So I think you sort of moved into that as you began to think about, like, do we have enough coverage and what have we done versus this whole deal with exploratory testing? Does that question even make sense? I'll ask that question.
Well, let's see. I think, what can I say about that? We learned things about this application today. A lot of it was done through things that were not super weird or out of the box, right? It was a lot of like the things that we expect that either the API specs say or the HTTP guidelines say that that's actually happening. And so would you learn more if you did more weird stuff, if you passed in more weird fields, if you tried every kind of validation and like, or like not passing in required fields and figured out which of those are required? Yeah, maybe. But is that serving the original charter of the team that asked you to do the coverage? Yeah, it's a balancing act. And I think, yeah, to your earlier question of how do you decide when to go down a rabbit hole or not, you have to keep an eye on whether the thing you're doing is valuable all the time. And the people who are good at that are able to keep those two threads going. Does that address what you were asking about learning versus verification, validation?
Sort of, but what I meant to say is like there's this idea of a difference between, you're exploring, try to answer questions you don't know versus verifying that, yeah, when we pass this in, we get the 200 back or we do this or because we expect that to happen. And then there's this other aspect where there's gaps and we're trying to understand what's going on in those gaps. And I felt like you were dancing around that, talking about, how do we know we have enough test coverage? Because if you know what you should expect, that's an easy question to answer. You can say, oh, yeah, if we do X, Y, and Z, we've tested what we expect. But when there's areas where you don't know, that's a very difficult question to answer. So I felt like you were kind of dancing, but I could have been completely wrong with that assumption. You were kind of dancing around that, and I apologize if I was.
Well, let's see. I think that learning versus verifying, if you're separating those things, you're not doing exploratory testing. If you're not learning, you're not exploring, or you're not making judgments about the things that you found, which is part of the testing part of exploratory testing. And it sounds like you might be of the mindset or in a context where it's possible to list out all of the expectations that you have and then compare the list and then you're done. That is not a context I've ever been in, or at least not one where all of those things that I then notice about my expectations are ever resolved. There's always more that's wrong or that we can have expectations about, right? We did not, I think very briefly I said like, oh, these are running quickly, right? This is running locally. But like, what are our expectations about what the behavior should be in the cloud? How fast can we get those tests to run? Is a developer going to look at that and be like, oh, 4 milliseconds, it should only take 0.4 milliseconds. There are many more things that we could have looked at that we didn't. And I think that will always be true.
Thank you.
Sure. What else?
So if we don't have any other question, then I would say, Elizabeth, thank you very much for your talk, and thank you for all participants for your questions. You're always welcome to be here. So what's next? We already planned our next meetup session. It will be in 1 month, 25th of February. We will have Parveen Sultana with her topic observability and quality engineering. So hope to see you there, guys, and have a nice evening. Bye-bye.
Have a nice evening too.